I went to the hospital to take care of my husband who had a broken bone. While he was sleeping, the head nurse slipped a piece of paper into my hand. Don't come again. Check the camera. My name is Lauren Whitmore. I am a forensic accountant, a career built on the absolute certainty of numbers. My job is to find the decimal point that has been nudged, the 2% discrepancy that unravels a billion-dollar fraud. I make a living finding what does not belong where it sits. And yet, 3 nights into my husband's hospitalization, I was the one completely blind to the obvious lie lying 6 feet from me. Caleb Whitmore lay beside me, both legs encased in thick plaster, suspended by a precarious architecture of metal pulleys and ropes. The room was standard issue, faintly yellowed walls, a single curtained window showing the miserable blue, black of a city, at 3 in the morning. The air was a stale mix of disinfectant, old linen, and the metallic odor of banked fear. This was the witching hour for hospitals, when the staff thinned out, and the facility felt less like a place of healing, and more like a quiet holding room for private terror. I had not slept properly in days. I was curled uncomfortably in a folding chair, afraid that even the slightest shift would trigger another wave of agonizing pain for him. Every minute was an exercise in self-control. I reminded myself that this was the agreement. This was marriage. When one person fell, the other carried the weight. I lived by the principle of objective endurance. If I could just hold on long enough, I could guarantee a positive outcome. I believed emotional safety was achieved through this self-sacrifice and preemptive calculation. Caleb moaned softly in his sleep. Sweat dotted his forehead. To anyone watching, he looked truly broken, dependent, and fragile. I reached forward and adjusted the blanket, my movements slow and practiced. During these long nights, I had started to notice the quiet anomalies. Caleb complained constantly, but his groans softened, almost automatically, whenever a nurse or doctor entered the room. He kept his phone hidden beneath his pillow, always face down, and silenced instantly when a message arrived. When I tried to check his casts or even adjust his legs, he would grip my wrist and plead, saying he did not want me to see him. Like that. I accepted it as masculine dignity, a refusal to be seen as weak. I told myself I was being a good wife by respecting his boundaries. Then there was Megan Cole, his younger cousin. She had moved to the city recently, and had stepped into the crisis with alarming efficiency. She ran errands, handled insurance paperwork, and brought endless takeout food. When I was too tired to think, she filled the gaps without complaint. She was bright and chatty, a perfect foil to the sterile gloom. I remembered thinking how lucky we were to have her, and how easily I trusted her completely. Looking back now, that trust feels like the biggest professional mistake of my life. I was so intent on performing the role of the devoted wife that I missed the basic forensic rule: follow the pattern that doesn't fit. The door opened. The head nurse, Rachel Moore, pushed her cart inside. Rachel was efficient, calm, and professional, the kind of woman who had seen too much human drama to participate in it. She checked the IV line and glanced at the monitors with barely a sound. Then she turned to me and quietly asked if I could step out for a minute to grab some Salin from the nurse's station. As I passed her, something cold and stiff pressed into the center of my palm. I froze for half a second. Rachel did not look at me. She simply raised one finger to her lips, a clear, silent warning to remain calm and quiet. My heart began to pound so loudly I was sure Caleb would hear it. I walked into the hallway, past the bank of elevators, and stopped under the dim, flickering light near the supply room. My hands, which review intricate spreadsheets daily, trembled slightly as I unfolded the piece of paper. The single sentence was written fast and unevenly. Check last night's security camera. He is not asleep. The paper felt less like a warning and more like an explosion. In that moment, everything I thought I knew about my husband, my marriage, and my life of carefully calculated safety shifted violently beneath me. I did not scream. I did not cry. I simply understood that the problem had moved from a matter of endurance to a matter of evidence. The single, uneven sentence from the nurse's note, "Check last night's security camera, he is not asleep," was a direct challenge to the fundamental premise of my life. For 3 days, I had operated purely on emotion, on the principle that my sacrifice was proof of love. Now, I was facing a problem in my preferred language: objective data. I did not go back to the room immediately. I went to the staff bathroom, splashed cold water on my face, and focused on regulating my breathing. I had 2 roles: And the one that paid the mortgage, the one that built a career, was the investigator. I had to let the wife stand down. First, I had to create distance. A few hours later, I walked back into the room with a carefully reconstructed expression of wariness. I told Caleb and Megan, who was already there, that I had been called into the office. I explained that a major corporate fraud case I was managing had hit a critical juncture, and I needed to spend a few hours securing files. It was the only acceptable excuse for abandonment, one rooted in my professional duty. Caleb's face clouded with feigned worry, but Megan gave a quick, sympathetic nod. They bought the lie. I drove out of the hospital parking lot, my hands gripping the wheel tight, but instead of heading to my office downtown, I pulled into a secluded corner of the hospital garage and locked the car. It was 7:30 in the morning. The fluorescent lights overhead hummed a monotonous, grating sound. I immediately called Marcus Lane, an old friend from college who now ran a high-end cybersecurity and investigation firm. He was meticulous, expensive, and completely discreet. I had trusted him with access to the most sensitive financial data in the world. I now needed to trust him with the most sensitive data in my life. I explained the situation in cold, detached terms, presenting the facts as I knew them: a suspicious accident, a husband who controlled access to his body and phone, and a note from a reliable source. I did not include my own exhaustion or fear. I spoke strictly about potential fraud. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, a pause longer than usual. "Lauren," he finally said, his voice low. "Some things, once you see them, you cannot unsee. You are about to trade a painful uncertainty for a certain, final hurt." I told him I understood. I needed the final hurt. The uncertainty was slowly dissolving my sanity. I authorized him to access the hospital's internal network and bypass any firewalls necessary. Then gave him the time window from the night before. While Marcus worked, I accessed my personal finances on my laptop. I reviewed our joint accounts, noting recent, large withdrawals from our investment portfolio, withdrawals Caleb had attributed to unstable construction contracts, and unforeseen business losses. His explanations had always been vague, but I had accepted them because I had never trusted emotion over his word. Now, the vague dips looked like a pattern. A bad pattern. It was almost 2 hours later when the secure link arrived, encrypted and delivered with a single text message. "Ready." I plugged in my headphones and stared at the screen. My hands were surprisingly steady. The footage was simple, grainy black and white, taken from the ceiling of the hospital room. I could see myself on the screen, a tired, small figure. Adjusting the blanket around Caleb before leaving, I watched the door close. The room went still. For a brief, desperate moment, the lawyer in me hoped Marcus had accessed the wrong feed, or that the nurse had been mistaken, that my fear had created a pattern where none existed. Then, on the screen, Caleb's eyes opened. They did not flutter open slowly, heavy with sleep and medication. They snapped open, alert, sharp, and completely focused. He looked nothing like the fragile, broken man I had been comforting for 3 days. He lifted his head, scanned the room with professional efficiency, and then, with absolute ease, pushed himself up onto his elbows. There was no hesitation, no wince, no visible struggle. The movement was smooth, confident, and betrayed the fact that his legs, which were supposedly shattered, were not the source of any physical pain. He swung his casted legs slightly, adjusted them, and then reached under his pillow for his hidden phone. My breath hitched, sharp and cold in my throat. I did not move. I did not speak. My body felt heavy and distant, as though I was watching the scene from the next car over. The lawyer in me absorbed the data points, the physical proof of deception, the calculated movement, the lack of pain. The wife in me was simply drowning in shock. A few minutes later, the door opened again. Megan, his cousin, walked in carrying a large paper bag. She smiled broadly as she closed the door behind her, locking it with a slight click. "Is she gone?" Megan asked. Caleb laughed. It was a clear, unrestrained sound that felt like sandpaper against my ears. "Perfectly gone," Caleb replied, his voice strong. Not the wheezing whisper I had grown accustomed to. Had to lay on the dramatics about the headache to get her to stay out longer. "She's worried sick about the bills now." They unpacked the bag. It was freed food and canned beer, not the bland, low-sodium hospital meals I had been eating by his bedside. Caleb joked about being tired of soup and pretending to be weak. Megan sat close to him, their shoulders touching. She playfully tapped his leg right through the cast. You have to keep acting helpless, Cal. Especially around her mother. She's the weak link if she smells anything, Megan said. Then came the part that didn't just turn my blood cold, it froze it solid. They started talking about my house. Not our house, but the brownstone my parents left me. The one that was specifically in my name and outside of our marital assets. Caleb explained the magnitude of his gambling debts. Debts that had pushed him to borrow money from people he described as dangerous. He said that once the house was sold, his debts would be gone. He claimed I was easy to convince because I always chose endurance first. He had spent 8 years understanding my greatest weakness, the ingrained belief that sacrifice guaranteed safety. She'll sell it. Caleb chuckled, taking a long drink. She always puts me first. Always. Megan nodded and casually mentioned the divorce papers they would file once the funds were secured. They spoke about divorcing me with the same casualness they discussed the terrible hospital coffee. The video ended. I removed my headphones and sat in a silence that was far heavier than any noise. I did not scream. I did not collapse. The emotional pain was entirely eclipsed by a cold, searing humiliation. It wasn't just the lie, or Megan, or the debts. It was the realization that I had been reduced to a simple, predictable role in their story, the predictable wife, the reliable sacrifice, the emotional cushion they both assumed would never walk away. They did not fear me. They assumed I would bend. That assumption, that complete underestimation of my intelligence, burned hotter than any insult. And in that heat, the part of me that searched for excuses, that softened the situation, died. In its place stood the woman who specialized in financial demolition, the forensic accountant who had seen too many elaborate cons to be fooled by a flimsy plaster cast. I realized my vulnerability was not love, it was my rigid devotion to a professional principle. The relentless pursuit of a calculated outcome, applied wrongly to my personal life. I deleted nothing. I saved everything. I changed my passwords, secured my documents, and created a secure data vault. The wife was gone. The investigator had arrived. I was not going back to confront Caleb. I was going back to dismantle him. I drove back to the hospital, parking my car and taking the elevator up to the 4th floor. The hardest thing was not the fear of confrontation, but the absolute necessity of acting normal. I had to look like the same sleep-deprived, dutiful woman who had walked out hours earlier. Every movement was calculated. Every muscle in my face was controlled. I needed to convince a man who had faked a compound fracture that I had seen nothing. I walked into the room with the same tired expression. I adjusted Caleb's pillow and asked, with a soft, convincing sigh, "How are you feeling, sweetheart?" "The pain still bad." He launched into a detailed, dramatic description of a spasm, clutching the sheets and narrowing his eyes. I listened without interrupting, my mind cataloging the performance. When a person believes they are losing control, they tighten their grip, but when they believe they are winning, they relax. I intended to give Caleb and Megan the confidence to relax. Megan was there, looking at me with what I now recognized as pity mixed with relief. "You look exhausted, Lauren. You really shouldn't push yourself so hard." I gave her a wary smile and thanked her for her concern. It took immense discipline not to flinch from her touch or her gaze. The difference now was that their words held no emotional power over me. They were just dialogue in a play I was about to shut down. That evening, I initiated the counter-performance. I sat beside Caleb's bed and started talking about the house. I spoke slowly, as if the words were physically painful to say. "Caleb, I had a terrible thought at the office today." I began, my voice wavering slightly. "The insurance money is going to take months, and your contract work is unstable. We are bleeding cash. Maybe selling the brownstone is the only way to keep us afloat, to keep your recovery stress-free." I watched him. The effect was instantaneous. His feigned worry vanished, replaced by a subtle, almost imperceptible surge of genuine relief. He reached for my hand and held it longer than usual, his grip now affectionate instead of controlling. "Oh, Lauren, darling, I would hate for you to do that," he said, but his eyes told a different story. He spoke about gratitude and fear, about not wanting to be a burden. Megan watched closely, her relief barely hidden behind a mask of concerned support. I had fed the trap, and they had taken the bait. From that moment on, I stopped reacting as a wife and started operating purely as an investigator. I agreed to call a real estate agent. I allowed the discussion of the house sale to dominate our conversations, giving them the illusion of control. While they relaxed into their perceived victory, I worked. Behind the scenes, I spent my nights in my secured home office. I met with a lawyer specializing in complex divorce and asset protection. I gathered every financial record, every tax return, every email exchange dating back 5 years. I spent 3 hours methodically tracing Caleb's debt patterns. Gambling transfers were separated from legitimate business expenses. Unofficial lenders were identified. Everything he had buried under silence surfaced cleanly on paper. Megan grew careless. She started showing small cracks in her performance. She would stay out late, claiming to be running errands. She whispered too confidently on the phone in the hallway. Her impatience when I slowly delayed decisions about the realtor became more apparent. Caleb, too, began slipping. Some days, focused on the potential sale, he forgot to groan when shifting in bed. Some days he looked healthier than he should have. His energy reserves clearly high. I noticed everything, the missed cue, the moment the mask slipped. I said nothing. My silence was my greatest weapon. Timing mattered. The longer they believed the house was already theirs, the more completely they would reveal who they truly were, providing a definitive, unassailable financial record for the court. They thought they were running a con. They had no idea the woman they were lying to made a living exposing them. I was not seeking revenge. I was simply waiting for the moment when the truth would collapse the story they had built. The pressure was mounting from every direction, and I needed it too. The closer they got to the money, the more aggressively they behaved, and the more sloppy their performance became. I was using their greed as the ultimate accelerant. Caleb's mother, who had been an infrequent presence before the accident, became a fixture by his bedside. She was kind, but persistent, and her conversation constantly circled back to the financial dilemma. "Lauren, darling," she would whisper, clutching my hand in the sterile hospital quiet. "You are such a good wife. You're doing the right thing. Money means nothing compared to Caleb's life, compared to getting him back on his feet. You must sacrifice this now." Her words, intended to reinforce my sense of wifely duty, simply hit the wall of my new reality. I realized the family dynamic was designed to enforce my role as the reliable sacrifice, exploiting my core belief that endurance was love. I smiled gently, nodded, and murmured, "I know, I'm working on it as fast as I can." I did not argue. Arguing would raise suspicion. Compliance was my new cover. Caleb, emboldened by the prospect of the sale, started slipping more frequently. One afternoon, he laughed too hard at something on the television, and the laugh was clear, robust, and completely pain-free. He caught himself instantly, the laugh turning into a sudden cough, followed by an immediate, dramatic moan that rattled the bedsheets. I was looking right at him. I maintained a blank expression, then reached over and stroked his forehead, asking if he needed more medication. He looked relieved, believing he had covered his tracks. Another time, I saw him shift his casted foot about 3 inches on the mattress. It was a normal, subconscious movement, a sign of restless sleep. A man with a true compound fracture would not move 3 inches without a cry. I noted the anomaly and logged it in my memory. My work in the evenings, meanwhile, was nearly complete. I had established a solid paper trail. Caleb's primary creditor was not a bank, but a private syndicate, and the debt amount was staggering. Nearly $800,000. I also discovered a pattern of smaller, routine deposits into an offshore account that, through careful forensic work, I managed to link directly to Megan's past address and business registration. It confirmed her active role as a co-conspirator, not just a sympathetic cousin. I had enough evidence to ensure the divorce would be quick and favorable. But I was still waiting for the trigger. I was waiting for them to fully commit to the moment of my ruin. Caleb provided that trigger late one Tuesday night. He was clearly nervous. "The agent hasn't called back, Lauren. Are they moving fast enough?" he asked. The same question he'd asked twice earlier that hour. I calmly assured him that real estate moves slowly. He gripped my wrist, his composure finally breaking. "No, you don't understand. I need this to move now. I have a payment due. They won't wait forever. I've extended twice. I have a deadline, Lauren." He had revealed the final, absolute stakes. He had confirmed the urgency was external, driven not by recovery, but by debt collection. That night I told my lawyer to prepare the final documents. I reviewed the captured video footage again, securing the original files Marcus had sent. I ensured my phone was fully charged and updated with the hospital floor plan. The time for waiting was over. The climax was coming. I was not waiting for revenge. I was waiting for the perfect timing, and the perfect audience. The night everything collapsed came quietly, almost anticlimactically. It was a Thursday. Visiting hours were almost over. The hallway outside Caleb's room was calm, filled with the soft, distant hum of the hospital, and the faint, rhythmic squeak of rolling carts. I was prepared for this. I had secured my mobile phone, and ensured the connection to the wall monitor was functional. I had my evidence ready. Caleb's mother sat beside the bed, whispering prayers and stroking his arm, still playing the role of the worried matriarch. Megan stood near the window, texting too often, her body language radiating impatience. Caleb himself was visibly nervous. He kept asking about the real estate agent, about the paperwork, pushing me to finalize the transaction. He was tense because his deadline was imminent. I kept answering gently, slowly, telling him everything was moving forward, that he just needed to be patient a little longer. I maintained my exhausted, compliant facade, giving them no reason to suspect the trap was about to spring shut. The door opened without a knock. 3 men walked in. They did not look like concerned family friends or doctors. They looked like professional tools of consequence. Their posture was stiff, their faces blank, and their eyes were sharp, scanning the room for points of weakness. The air in the room changed instantly, the temperature seeming to drop by 10 degrees. One of them looked straight at Caleb, who was clutching the sheets, and spoke his name. Caleb Whitmore. Caleb's face drained of color. He immediately launched into the high-octane version of his performance, grabbing his legs and beginning to moan loudly, his eyes wide with a combination of fear and feigned pain. His mother stood up in alarm, moving to shield her son. "Who are you? You cannot come in here. My son is gravely injured." The man who appeared to be the leader smiled, a cold, empty gesture that didn't reach his eyes. "We are here about money," he said. He explained the amount Caleb owed, the interest, the overdue deadlines. He said they were tired of waiting for the construction management deal to close. The mention of the exact, staggering figure, nearly $800,000, silenced the room completely. Caleb pointed desperately toward me. "She's selling the house! My wife is selling the brownstone! The money is coming. I promise you, be patient!" He was begging, his voice cracking, the performance for the creditors mixing seamlessly with his genuine panic. That was the exact moment, the lowest point. The moment they thought they had forced me into financial and personal ruin to save him. I stepped forward. I did not raise my voice, but the sound of my single word cut through Caleb's desperate pleas. "No." Every face in the room snapped toward me. The creditors, Caleb, Megan, and his mother. I addressed the leader of the men calmly. "There will be money?" I said, my voice steady, "but not from my house. I will not be selling it." Caleb started to protest, but I ignored him. I took out my phone, walked over to the wall where the television monitor was mounted for patient entertainment, and connected it. I did not pause. I pressed play. The grainy, black and white footage of the hospital room filled the screen. Caleb, alert and sharp, easily pushing himself up onto his elbows. Caleb laughing. Megan walking in, saying, "Is she gone?" The sound of their voices, clear and damning, explaining how the accident was staged, how they would sell the brownstone, how Caleb would file for divorce afterward. The detail of Megan tapping his leg through the cast, reminding him to keep acting helpless. His mother screamed, a strangled, horrified sound that finally broke the silence. Megan collapsed against the wall, her hands shaking, her phone dropping to the floor. Caleb stopped moaning. He tried to speak, tried to plead, but no sound would come out. He was finally paralyzed, not by injury, but by exposure. The 3 men watched the entire footage. When the loop ended, the leader simply shook his head and laughed softly, a dry, incredulous sound. He looked at Caleb, still frozen in the bed. "We've never seen someone fake a tragedy so thoroughly to skip a payment," he stated. They left with a sharp, pointed warning for Caleb, that the deadline was now absolute, and that my house was no longer a factor in their equation. When the door closed behind them, the room felt hollowed out, stripped bare. Caleb reached for me, reaching for the woman he had always relied upon to clean up his messes, begging, explaining, pleading for forgiveness. I looked at him for a long moment, truly seeing him for the first time, and felt nothing at all. The performance was over, and the truth, objective and unforgiving, had finally won. The room was silent, The kind of silence that feels heavier than 1,000 screams. The truth had collapsed the world Caleb and Megan had built, and now they were scrambling among the wreckage. Caleb, abandoning the facade of the broken patient entirely, struggled to sit up, his face a roadmap of pure panic. He reached for me, his voice cracking and wet with genuine fear. "Lauren, don't leave, please, don't leave. I can explain everything. I was trapped. Those men. I was terrified. We can fix this. Just sell the house. I promise I'll change. I'll go to rehab. I'll do anything you want." He was trying to appeal to the woman who always chose endurance. To the person who would always sacrifice herself first. I did not move toward him. I did not move away. I stood by the empty screen, the residual image of the fraud still shimmering in my mind. For years, I had searched for explanations and excuses for his behavior. Now, faced with absolute clarity, I realized those words were meaningless. They were just more dialogue in a performance. His mother was openly sobbing in the corner, torn between anger at Caleb's betrayal and shame for her own misplaced pressure. Megan had pressed herself against the wall, her hands trembling uncontrollably. She started murmuring apologies, repeating that she was young, that she had been influenced, that she never meant for it to go this far. I had no response for her. Her regret was a consequence of getting caught, not of true remorse. I focused on my bag, gathering my jacket, my keys, and my phone, the objective proofs of my new reality. My hands did not shake. They were steady, efficient, professional. I looked at Caleb for one final, long moment, seeing the charismatic, quiet man who had wooed me, and the desperate, parasitic stranger he had become. The feelings were not fury or hatred, they were a profound, empty dispassion. "There is nothing to fix, Caleb," I said, my voice low and even, utterly devoid of emotion. The trust was dismantled too carefully to be rebuilt with panic and words. I stepped back, physically separating myself from the bed, the ropes, and the ruin. "I will not sell the house. I will not take responsibility for your debts," I stated plainly, delivering the consequences like an accountant delivering a final audit report. "I will be filing for divorce immediately. The footage and the financial records are already secured." He lunged forward slightly, pulling at his sheets, his eyes wide with disbelief. "You can't! We're married, Lauren!" "I need you." His mother staggered forward, pleading, "Lauren, please think of us! He's still your husband!" I met their frantic eyes. I was no longer the woman who suffered quietly for loyalty. I was the woman protecting her dignity. I finished gathering my things slowly, allowing the finality of my actions to settle over the room. I did not look back at the bed or the man who had occupied my future. At the door, I paused, looking back only at the desolate space I was leaving behind. "Caleb," I said, "this is not punishment." He looked up, desperate for any shred of hope. "It is consequence," I finished. "And consequences, unlike punishment, do not require cruelty to be effective." Then, I walked out of the hospital room. I walked past the nurse's station, nodded faintly to a nearby security guard, and took the elevator down to the ground floor. The night air outside was cold and sharp against my face, a welcome shock after the stagnant hospital air. The city lights reflected off the wet pavement as cars passed. None of the drivers noticing the woman who had just walked away from her entire life. For the first time since the accident, I felt something close to relief. I was no longer waiting in a chair beside someone else's deception. I was walking forward, alone, on my own terms. I did not turn around. I did not look back. The silence outside was safe. The performance was over. After I left the hospital, everything moved faster than I expected, driven by the cold, hard logic of the evidence I possessed. The divorce papers were filed within days. With the security footage and the meticulous forensic audit of Caleb's debts, there was no room for negotiation or argument. His debts were proven to be his alone, tied exclusively to gambling syndicates, not to our marital finances. The house remained mine, clean, untouched, exactly as my parents had intended. Caleb's world, on the other hand, began its quick descent. Without the prospect of the house sale, the creditors became aggressive. His health seemed to deteriorate genuinely once the performance ended. Without an audience to manipulate, there was nothing left to sustain the illusion of recovery. Megan disappeared from my life entirely. No calls, no messages, just silence, a co-conspirator who had evaporated into the city. I did not look for her. I did not care. For a while, I lived very quietly. I returned to work, focusing intensely on numbers, schedules, and complex projects that demanded logic but asked nothing from my heart. In the evenings, I cooked simple meals and sat in rooms that finally felt honest. There was loneliness, yes, a hollow space where a future had once been. But there was also peace. It was the safe, quiet peace that comes from knowing you are no longer guarding a lie. It was during this period of intentional solitude that I met Daniel Brooks. He was introduced through a mutual colleague at a professional accounting seminar. He was calm, observant, and listened far more than he spoke. He never asked invasive questions about my recent disappearance from the social scene. When he noticed my boundaries, my almost clinical need for space and privacy, he respected them without comment. We talked about ordinary things: careers, cities, small daily frustrations, the structural flaws of corporate mergers. There was no pressure to define anything, no urgency to explain my past. That difference mattered more than I could articulate. For the first time, I realized how utterly exhausting it had been to live in a constant state of emotional defense with Caleb. With Daniel, I did not feel the need to perform or prove anything. I was simply allowed to exist, and slowly, without drama or promises, I began to understand that rebuilding does not require grand, dramatic gestures. Sometimes, it starts with a silence that feels safe. Daniel did not arrive in my life like a rescue. There were no declarations, no insistence that he could fix what had been broken. He never spoke badly about my past, and he never asked me to move faster than I was ready to go. We spent time together in small, ordinary ways: coffee after work, short walks in the evening. One evening, while we sat across from each other at a quiet table, Daniel said something that stayed with me. A simple sentence that redefined my past 8 years. He told me he believed trust was not something you demand out of commitment. It is something you earn slowly through consistency. Those words settled deep in my chest. I realized that for years I had mistaken intensity for love, and endurance for loyalty. I had believed that suffering quietly was the ultimate proof of commitment. But with Daniel, there was no suffering to justify, no role to play. I was not careful because I was afraid. I was careful because I finally valued myself. We did not rush into labels. What we built was slower and far steadier than anything I had known before. And in that slowness, I found safety. Not the fragile safety built on silence and sacrifice, but the kind that allows you to breathe without watching every single word or step. For the first time, I understood that love does not ask you to disappear. It asks you to arrive as you are. Looking back now, I understand something I could not see back then. This story was never really about revenge. It was about clarity. I believed that if I just gave a little more, waited a little longer, everything would eventually make sense. But the truth is this: when respect disappears, patience does not save a relationship. It only delays the damage. Caleb did not lose me because of one mistake. He lost me because he chose deception over honesty. And I did not walk away to punish him. I walked away because staying would have meant abandoning myself. If you are listening to this, and you recognize pieces of your own life in mine, hear this clearly. You are not weak for trusting, and you are not cruel for choosing yourself. Walking away from a toxic situation is not failure, it is responsibility. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop explaining, stop sacrificing, and start protecting what matters most: your dignity, your peace, and your future. This is the art of consequence, not about anger, but about truth, timing, and reclaiming yourself.